Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest Red Raptor Writes. I finally finished the newest release from Sucker Punch and the last PlayStation 4 exclusive, Ghost of Tsushima. I really enjoyed it. It was a great game and send off for another great Sony console in a long line of great consoles and exclusives. Yeah, take notes Nintendo, instead of constantly churning out Mario Karts, Mario Parties, and Smash Bros for decades. Also, I want to thank my friend Brian from Morning, Noon, and Night for lending Ghost to me. Being a Sucker Punch creation, Ghost of Tsushima took a lot of inspiration from their previous awesome exclusive, InFamous, a game 11 years its senior. 2009's InFamous and Ghost of Tsushima have a lot in common, but also have a lot of differences. So here I'm left wondering, were those changes good? Is Sucker Punch improving as a developer, or is their latest release a regression, an inferior product? Which game is better, Ghost of Tsushima or InFamous? And just for the record, I'm only going to be talking about 2009's InFamous, the first installment, not Infamous 2 or Second Son. That's because I think the first one's the best one, and it would be unfair for me to compare it to the inferior ones. In my opinion, Infamous 2 is a good sequel with a lot of improvements, but not quite as great as the original, and Second Son is pretty bad. Alright, so without further interruption, let's dig this up. There's no better place to begin the comparison than with the stories for both of these games. If nothing else, it'll give us a nice frame of reference when discussing everything else. Sucker Punch's games feature one extraordinary man who's stuck in a hellish war zone that's been overrun by murderous factions. Both games start with the world of the protagonist ending, and with them waking up into a new setting, being reborn. The protagonist must then use their abilities to rid their respective settings of their enemies and restore order. Much of the hero's struggles come from the new identities they've taken in their quest and how this identity informs the world around them and their duty to society. The hero needs to figure out what kind of man they want to be and how that will change their people. This is a great idea that works in both a superhero adventure and a samurai epic. Let's get into more specifics with InFamous. The earlier release is centered around a bike messenger named Cole McGrath. On one night, just like any other, while making his runs, a massive bomb explodes, leaving Empire City in ruins. This bomb is called the Racephere, a special device that absorbs energy and transfers it into gifted individuals called conduits. Cole is one of these conduits and wakes up from the blast with electric abilities. After regaining consciousness, Cole, his buddy Zeke, and ex-girlfriend Trish work to escape the city, which has been put under quarantine due to a plague. Wow, this was ahead of its time. After that plan goes about as wrong as a party of anti-vaxxers, their only play becomes to work with a federal agent named Moya, who wants you to maintain some level of control in the city while finding another agent named John White and the Racephere in the process. As the story unfolds, we learn more about the Racephere, the shadiness of the US government, and Cole's true importance within the story. InFamous is divided into 3 acts, which is represented by 3 islands that make up Empire City. There's the Neon District, where the beginning of InFamous takes place. Here, the conflicts are established, Cole helping Moya keep order while chasing leads on the Racephere, his growingly distant relationship with Trish, and introductions to the First Sons and their leader Kessler. After confronting the leader of the Reaper gang, Sasha, we make our way into the cruddy Warren District, where our protagonist hunts down the Racephere and its keeper Alden, leader of the Dustmen. John comes out of hiding only to reveal that Moya's been lying to Cole and assists in the hunt for the weapon of mass destruction. This leads Cole and Zeke to Alden's garbage tower at the end of the Warren District. With the Racephere in hand, Zeke gets surrounded by 3 competitors, Cole, Alden, and Kessler, only to betray his best friend and join the shadowy figure who promises unimaginable power. Shriveled Alden rampages to confront Kessler, only to be stopped by Cole. The final act of InFamous happens in the Historic District. Immediately upon entry, Cole is put through the toughest trial yet when Trish is dropped from a building in front of him. His newfound hatred of Kessler fuels his final destruction, or snag, of the Racephere, followed by John's disintegration in the process. Now we're at the finale, where after a boss battle with Kessler, the withered old man reveals the truth. The truth that Kessler is Cole McGrath, a version of him who failed to kill a deadly conduit simply called the Beast. Instead of fighting, Kessler, or Cole at this point, ran with Trish and their family until it was too late. In order to save the world, the villain of InFamous used a new power to go back in time, accelerate the Racephere's production, and use it to turn Cole into the most powerful and hardened version of himself he can be. Even going as far as to kill Trish so nothing would hold him back. Dang, no mind has been blown this hard since 1963. InFamous is a game that shrouds itself in mystery, and it does a great job. The twist is that perfect blend of surprising enough to be mind-blowing, but built up enough so that on subsequent playthroughs, players will see all the hints they overlooked. Everything connects, building up to a giant moment. Back in the day when this came out, I didn't realize how much of it has to do with conspiracy. Zeke fears the worst from the government, thinking they're hunting the Racephere purely to strengthen its own soldiers and establish an iron grip on its citizens. Later in the story, we can't shake the feeling he's right, considering how untrustworthy Moria winds up. I love the attention to detail here, cause after certain events take place, Cole will stumble upon TV broadcasts with journalists who give the credit for all of Cole's actions to the US government, and whenever they do something shady, it's always spun into a complete lie. The one dude who hates on everyone, fairly or unfairly, the TV jacker, finds his program cancelled when big government breaks into his studio and murders him on air. Then it's spun as the army stopping a terrorist broadcast. Guys, this game predicted quarantines, riots, and fake news. Sucker Punch was way ahead of its time. John White, too, has spent years undercover within the First Sons, recording the organization's science experiments. He emerges paranoid, trusting no one, doing everything to keep a low profile, even spending every call counting the number of seconds until someone can triangulate his position. And then there's Kessler, who spent decades plotting, organizing every last detail in taking over the First Sons, creating the Racephere, and getting his younger self to deliver it. There are clear themes of secrecy, lies, and control that resonate through all aspects of this insane narrative.
Yeah. And Santa Claus shot JFK.
The story of Ghost is a similar one. It doesn't deal with conspiracies, but it's about a man and his allies who work to restore peace to their islands by getting rid of murderous enemies. Ghost of Tsushima is a video game based off of the Japanese samurai films from the 50s and 60s. The developers have discussed being inspired by Seven Samurai, Sanjuro, and the manga Usagi Yojimbo. We can see like how in some of these old stories, this game is for the most part grounded in reality. There are no superpowers or supernatural events. Because the people of Tsushima Island were religious and had their own practices, we do see a lot of their myths, their beliefs, but the game never goes all in on these by showing huge supernatural forces. Instead, we stay grounded in the still fictional tales of a samurai. This particular story is a work of historical fiction, taking place during the first Mongol invasion of Japan in 1274, but with fictional characters and a lot of events that didn't really happen. The protagonist we control is a young samurai named Jin Sakai, who is one of the few who survived this version of the Mongol landing at Komoda Beach. While wounded and unconscious, Jin gets pulled off the sand by a bandit named Yuna. After the cinematic opening, Yuna nurses Jin back to health, allowing him to reconfront the Mongol leader, Khotun Khan, at Castle Kaneda, the most polite fortress in all of Tsushima. This goes horribly wrong, because if it didn't, then we would have paid $60 for a 1-hour game. And Sucker Punch wasn't looking to deal with an angry mob. That's what Naughty Dog's for. This defeat brings us back to that 3-act structure we saw back in 2009, where each act brings us to another section of the area that was previously blocked from us. It served them well before, so why not do it again? Act 1 takes place in the southernmost area of the map, Izuhara, where Lord Sakai works to put together an elite crew who will help him rescue his uncle Lord Shimura from Castle Kaneda. Jin teams up with the archer Ishikawa, Samurai Masako, leader of the Straw Hat Ronins Ryuzo, God I hate Ryuzo, and Yuna's brother Taka, who will create a grapple hook for Jin. External and internal conflicts are set up as our heroic samurai adopt stealth and dishonorable tactics to defeat the Mongols. The storming of the castle at the end of Act 1 is actually successful, freeing Shimura while Khotun and the treacherous Ryuzo flee. Act 2 is in the center of the map, Toyotama, and has a similar setup. This time with the guidance of his uncle, Shimura, Sakai gathers allies allies and prepares a new resistance army to defeat the Khan further north at Castle Shimura. The Japanese reconquest of Castle Shimura and most of Tsushima Island is due in large part to the Ghost, since Sakai poisoned the Mongol forces before Shimura could lead a final charge. Disgusted with his actions, Shimura arrests his nephew, and to make matters worse, the Khan flees northward yet again. At least Ryuzo actually dies this time though. Dang, he sucked. And this brings us to the final act in the far north Kamigata region, where Jin Sakai escapes capture and prepares for a final assault on Khotun Khan before he sends ships to the mainland. But nature had other plans for this fleet, so why not try again, right? Oh. At their final confrontation, the outcast Ghost versus the Mongol leader, Jin slaughters all 800 pounds of loser and goes to watch the sunrise on a grateful universe. Well, not quite, because he still needs his punishment from the whole poison shenanigan. Lord Shimura strips Sakai of all status and challenges him to die honorably in a duel, the way a proper samurai fights. Unless you suck at this game like I do, Jin completely wrecks his uncle. Now, this is where things get weird. How the game ends depends on player choice, which is very strange considering this has been, yes, an open world game, but with the story set in stone through and through. The player can choose to either kill or spare Lord Shimura, leading to two similar yet unique endings. You know what? Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Player choice and karma will definitely come up later. Ghost of Tsushima's story is certainly simpler than that of InFamous. We don't have a rich backstory to discover or mysteries to unlock. InFamous had simpler, more straightforward characters in a complex story. In their later release, the developers went with the opposite, a simple story with more complex characters. Which one's better is hard to say, it all comes down to personal preference. If you want a layered story that blows you away every time and puzzle pieces to solve, then InFamous is more your speed. If you want an easy to follow adventure with very engaging characters, then I'd recommend Ghost. Building off of the story, it's time to discuss the players we control throughout these exclusives. I pretty much went over the gist of what Jin Sakai is about when I summed up the story, but I think there's a lot more worth telling. His journey really begins as a boy years before the actual events that the game takes place. During a battle against bandits, Jin watched as his wounded father begged for help. Unable to do anything, our lead just sat there and watched him be impaled. This thrust Jin into the role of samurai as he wanted to be able to defend himself and those around him. Never again will he be helpless to defend his people. Lord Sakai trained with Shimura for years until we reached the starting point of Ghost of Tsushima. I really like the training sessions you get in the first act of the game. Not only do we get some of the game's most beautiful visuals, or Lord Shimura's super defined, realistic old man face, but it's a lot of fun to just see how long I can abuse him. Chronologically, now we're at the inciting incident for the game, the Battle of Komoda Beach. It's all of Tsushima's samurai versus thousands and thousands of Mongol invaders. The battle is brutal, with the exception of Sakai who gets rescued and Shimura who's captured. All the samurai die there on the shore. Well, the ones who decide to show up, Ishikawa! Lord Sakai is finding himself once again in a state of helplessness, even as a samurai. Being a samurai alone isn't enough to defeat Khotun Khan. The Mongols anticipate their predictable attacks, their strategies, so Jin needs to become something new in order to rise to the occasion. He has to break the Japanese traditions of honor and fight as a ghost. Even though our main character is a lord in feudal Japan, with his own manor and servants and peasants, the writers were still able to give him a surprisingly deep connection to the audience through his internal turned external conflict. Jin is a forward-thinking realist who understands that the norms of his day need to be changed if his society is to survive. His uncle is the opposition to this idea. He's a traditionalist who clings to his beliefs regardless of how well they fare against the Mongols. He would rather have himself, his army, and Tsushima die with honor than live dishonorably. This is a great moral dilemma, and even though Jin is right to want to save his island, Ghost doesn't present it as a clear-cut answer. There are story and gameplay consequences for his actions. After poisoning the invaders, they learn how to produce the same poison from flowers and intend to use it on an assault on mainland Japan. This impacts the gameplay because after this event, if you're shot by an arrow, you'll die of poisoning unless you heal yourself. Going back to how our hero evolves, we see him very hesitant at first, but begin to embrace the ghost after seeing the results and the hope it brings to Tsushima. By the end of the second act, Jin has to make a final decision whether to embrace the ghost by poisoning the Mongols or fight the way Shimura wants him to, earning his favor and accepting adoption as his son who will inherit his rule. Knowing that the Khan is prepared for Shimura, the ghost is embraced. Jin Sakai chooses to sacrifice himself, his own name and status for the people of Tsushima Island, solidifying himself as the hero Tsushima didn't deserve, but the one that it needed. Dang, this was a great character struggle. I have to nitpick it though, because Sucker Punch presents a very glorified view of samurai and the feudal system and honor. In real life, Lord Sakai would have been unanimously exalted as a hero. Codes of honor work for fighting other samurai and settling disputes, but for bandits and invaders, they're allowed to be killed using any means possible. The shogun wouldn't order your arrest for saving Japan. This point did bother me as I began the game, but eventually I got used to the in-game world and how it works, and I was able to overlook it. Now that we've discussed the protagonist of Ghost, we can move on to Cole McGrath from InFamous. Again, I should point out that because InFamous has a deeper, more complicated overall story, it provides less time for character introspection or rich backstories to explore. InFamous gives us what we need and not much else. We get simple characters who react to insane circumstances. Cole himself is made to be a relatable character by making him an everyman unlike Lord Sakai. Sucker Punch intentionally made him a nobody on the bottom of the pecking order. He barely earns money by making deliveries and sleeps on a roof with Zeke. His dad carries around a picture of Trish in his wallet, loving her as the daughter he never had, and his mom lies to others that he became a teacher. Guys, living with Zeke Jedediah Dunbar is as low as it gets.
Your middle name is Jedediah?
Yes, it is. After my grandfather.
From the offset, yeah, we get this guy, and like any other normal person, his first goal is to escape. We've talked about wants and needs before on the channel. Many characters in fiction have something they want at the beginning of their arc, but it's not actually what's best for them. That's their need. What they learn over time they need to become a better person or whatever. Cole and Zeke want to break quarantine and escape the nightmare heckhole of Empire City. The two join a riot at the Stanton Bridge in a failed attempt to book it. Once that plan gets ripped apart by machine gun fire, Cole makes a deal with Moya that he'll bring her the Ray Sphere in exchange for safe passage out of the dystopia. This search involves doing lots of selfless things like freeing hostages, restoring power, stopping terror, but for selfish reasons. They're only means to the end, which is to escape or to get on Trish's good side. It isn't until Cole sees what a selfish lust for power looks like that he understands his need. In the Warren District, John reveals how Moya was lying and using him for the gain of the US government, and a grumpy old man wastes his entire life chasing his birthright, and even his roof buddy betrays him hoping for powers from Kessler. Then, at the scene of her death, Trish reaffirms how proud she is that Cole uses his powers to help others. Or she uses her last breath to nag you as any girlfriend would. By the end of the game, Cole understands his need to protect the people of Empire City who struggle to survive. He shows this by destroying the Ray Sphere instead of using it for power like many others and going to kill Kessler. Our main character goes from looking out for himself to looking out for Empire City over the course of the game. Even though the player controls Cole's actions and what kind of story the game tells, it's nice that the developers still made Cole his own character with a personality and an arc, so it's not a full-on role-playing game like Skyrim. He's a cynical, snarky, sarcastic dude, but in a charming way, unlike Delsin, who you just want to deck right in the Also, I gotta love his gravelly voice. Dang, it's so cool yet aggressive at the same time. I wish I had that voice naturally come from my mouth.
I take one last look down at myself, my future self, and turn away, the rage curdling inside.
What a shame Jason Cottle was replaced in the sequel with some redneck sounding dweeb. That had to be the worst decision in gaming history. Of course, there are more walking, talking pixels aside from the player character. The supporting cast for both games range from great to okay. Neither of them have anybody who's offensively bad, but if you only play these once or twice, you'll have no trouble forgetting them. On the better side of the spectrum are Yuna and Taka. Yuna acts like the older protective sister, which complements Taka's bravery coupled with naivety. They bounce off each other very well, and Jin too. You can tell that the brother is kind of a fanboy, which is nice, but misguided. Yuna has a much bigger role in the game, being present much longer and having more influence on Sakai's character. As a runaway slave turned thief, she's used to looking out for her own survival and Taka's no matter the cost. Our main protagonist incorporates her worldview into that of the samurai. Instead of looking out for number one at all costs, he does everything in his power to defend his island, even resorting to dishonorable practices. It's this fusion of the classic samurai code and thievery that create the ghost needed to bring down Khotun Khan. Oh, and Brian and I were both happy to see that there is no cliche end of second act falling out over a misunderstanding when Taka dies. Yuna never throws a fit or blames Jin, instead understanding that it was her brother's nature to charge in with good intentions but no real plan. His death is a touching moment, but it doesn't go into predictable Hallmark drama. Christmas just ended. I've had enough of that. I've pretty much gone over the gist of Lord Shimura and what he's all about, but I really like him. I think he's a great foil for his nephew, and I was looking forward to when their ideological conflict would eventually turn into a physical one. He's the real antagonist of the game because Khotun Khan, yeah, let's be honest, he's not the worst video game villain, but certainly not the best either. I mean, he fulfills his role in the story, providing a threat to Japan and catalyst to make Jin transform himself. His double boss battle in the end was great. I have no problems with that. There's just not much for me to latch onto aside from how he serves the mechanics of the story. The Khan has this ongoing thing where he wants to make a name for himself instead of just being Kublay's cousin or Genghis's grandson. Then this is supposed to relate to Jin and his relationship with his uncle, but that's comparing apples and oranges. That was never a conflict between the two, so in the end it doesn't go anywhere or add anything significant. Ghost of Tsushima also throws a handful of side characters that don't contribute much to the main story, but get their own string of side quests. On one hand, this is a nice addition since InFamous, allowing us to spend more time with characters that we care about while not eating up main questline time by forcing them into unnecessary missions. I appreciate their addition and think this is a good idea that should appear in more games. However, most of these side stories I personally found uninteresting. Much of this may be due to quest structure and the gameplay loop, but I'll get into that stuff in the next part. During my playthrough, I only actively enjoyed two side quest lines, those being Yuna's and Ishikawa's. They both have compelling enough stories and change up the gameplay enough to be worth it. Another complaint I have is how these side characters themselves aren't very dynamic. Okay, here's a first. You're gonna see me compliment Batman Arkham Knight. In Arkham Knight, if you completed the main story first, using super force writing to expose the Dark Knight's identity, then different lines of dialogue will play for every character you interact with afterwards. They'll all comment on you being Bruce Wayne. Even average thugs will have more of these comments spliced into their usual stuff. Ghost of Tsushima doesn't have this. You can complete Yuna's missions before or after Taka dies without any change. Whether you approach the other side characters as future heir to Lord Shimura and honorable samurai, or later as an outlaw, there'd be no difference. Everyone is very static, so overall this side character system was a good idea in theory, but in execution it still needs a lot of work. Is it an improvement that at least Ghost has character missions, or a regression because it's another downside that doesn't work as well as the devs hoped? Okay, let's jump straight into Kessler because hands down, he's one of the most fascinating villains I've ever seen in a game. Don't worry, Andrew Ryan, I'll always love you the most. While we induction grind our way around Empire City, we get bits and pieces of backstory on this guy, how he manipulated the First Sons and tested the race fear. But in the very end, it all comes together. The criminal puppet master went through the effort of doing everything he did in what we learn is a last-ditch effort to save humanity from the beast. Kessler breaks the standard bad guy routine who does things for money or power or wanting friends. He's not the basic boss to fight at the end like some people. Arguably, Kessler is the real hero of InFamous. All the evil deeds he does is only to help the greater good. That's the thing about him. He's an extreme utilitarian, willing to sacrifice the few in order to save the many. In this case, the scale is so large that the few ends up being all of Empire City, but is one city worth saving the world? Maybe. The antagonist goes back in time, takes over the First Sons from Alden, speeds Vasesphere development, tracks down the past Cole, has him deliver the bomb, transforms the entire city into a hellscape, and then even goes as far as to murder the woman he loved, all in an effort to make a more resilient Cole McGrath who will be strong enough to fight the beast. Kessler is willing to do everything necessary for the good of mankind. Is he a hero for his immense sacrifice, or a villain for the crimes he's committed? Do the ends justify the means? At what point did he go too far? Now this is a villain done right. Kessler is the kind of fictional character that belongs in a philosophy book, right next to Andrew Ryan. Zeke, not being a conduit, didn't get any powers from the blast, relegating him to the role of With the exception of John, this dude's the most paranoid, going off about the feds, the Pentagon, and secret organizations. I've mentioned how he fears big government and what they'll do with the race sphere, so Zeke wants to balance it out by making commoners super. I don't know if this interpretation of the Second Amendment would hold any weight in court, but this certainly ties into a growing inferiority complex. Now Zeke is being overshadowed by Cole and forced to watch the events of the game take place from the sidelines. There's a jealous side and a noble side to this. On one hand, he tries to help by spying on the dustmen, and he even volunteers to help the police. But on the other side, he talks about marketing, wants attention from the ladies, and even abandons cops who need him in order to play the hero. This results in many lives lost. The final decision he makes, though, is to try to gain powers from the race sphere, a device that killed thousands when last used, even going as far as joining Kessler for help. After all the dumb ideas, he does stick his neck out for Cole in the final fight, only to be body shamed.
This doesn't concern you, fat man.
This leaves the two on a confusing note when the game finally does end, so it's up for the sequel to show how this turns out. Normally, I'd pan InFamous for making us buy a sequel to fill in gaps left in the first entry, but considering how this one ends, InFamous 2 was inevitable. It's like a part 2. You know what's not inevitable? Second Son! The bad decisions and betrayal may get the player to hate Zeke by the historic district, but for me,
that's impossible.
His friendship with Zeke is so apparent as their banter is woven into the dialogue so naturally. You buy that these two have been friends for a long time and have a rich history together. Also, so many of their calls are so dang enjoyable.
Look like a man and a dog or something.
Dwight was killed by a dog? Damn. I had a cousin that went the same way. Whew. I shouldn't have had an open casket, but old Smitty wanted one. People were passing out, puking, you name it. It was horrible. Still haven't recovered from that one.
Whoever wrote the dialogue needs a raise. The last character we're talking about is Trish Daly, whose relationship with Cole has grown estranged since the blast because that's when her sister died. Whether Amy died from the explosion itself, or debris, or radiation, isn't explicitly stated, but whatever the exact cause, nothing's stopping her from letting her anger out on the protagonist. This right here also makes you feel bad for him, because he didn't know what the package was, he didn't intend to hurt anybody by just doing his job that day. Cole's a victim of unfortunate circumstances, yet gets crapped on by Trish. She doesn't mean to be malicious, but she needs someone to blame, a punching bag to let her anger out, and that unfortunately becomes Cole. Yet, despite her typical women being emotional thing, she still asks for favors like she wants you to be around. Talk about mixed signals. After what is honestly the game's worst mission, having to escort her bus full of medical supplies from the Neon to the Warren, Trish is finally willing to make amends, giving us hope that they'll get back together soon. Well, we think that, but... I'll be real with you here. Her death is impactful if you're doing a good playthrough, but feels pretty cheap if you're evil. In both scenarios, Trish is tied to one roof, while 6 doctors are tied to another. With bombs ready to drop both, Cole only has time to save one. If you pick the noble option to save the doctors, then you're thinking like Kessler. You're willing to sacrifice the few, the one you care about, for the many. Trish's death is a touching moment. She gives a good death speech in the bad option too, but it feels forced. Even if you save Trish, it's apparently a trick. Being a doctor, she's tied up with the other doctors, so the woman you save is just a decoy. The excuse is that Kessler's been studying your actions, so he knows which one you'll pick. But you can still make evil choices with good karma, or vice versa, so he can't know this for sure. It's silly and forced, and there has to be a better way to get Trish to die, even if we choose her, like maybe Cole kills her himself after she says how ashamed she is. I don't know, but there were better ways to do this. Alright, this video is already way longer than I expected, so I'm gonna stop it here and split the analysis into 2 parts. Next time, we'll be examining karma systems, gameplay, and setting for these 2 games. Once it's up, I'll leave a card at the top and a link in the description. See you then.